Imagine having a world-class chief operating officer just sat in your pocket. Somebody who you could have as the small or medium-sized business owner to answer your questions, help you deal with things that normally only big businesses get the privilege of solving, and actually streamline your business. That, and imagine somebody who brings some joy into your business as well. Today I'm joined by the wonderful Joy Harris. Joy, thanks for coming along.
Thanks, Rob, for having me. I love that intro. That was great. I think I need to cut that out, put that on my page.
That's it. Snippet it. One of our mutual friends, David, says I speak in sales copy. So, it's yours as a gift.
Well, thank you.
Joy, I like to start off every one of these KingdomPreneur episodes with the same question. And that's this. If you could have a cup of coffee with Jesus tomorrow and ask him anything you liked, what would you ask him?
I would ask him if I'm on the path that he put me on, and if I'm on the right path.
Excellent. And based upon life's feedback, how would the conversation go?
I think it would go, yes, you are, but you need to keep stepping out there. He's like, people need to know where you are so that you can help them.
Ooh. So what does that look for you? Or is that, that's obviously part of this evening, but or today rather, but what does that look like for you, stepping out there?
Well, I've started doing it by connecting with David, because David, he's good at pushing you to your next best level, whether it's your comfort zone or not. He has an amazing way of, getting you to think differently, which is something I do, but it's interesting to have somebody do it for you. And also to make sure that I'm letting people know about my stillborn son's journey in the book that I wrote about him, because they tie together in the sense that I had to navigate this loss while I was running a business and being a mom and trying to figure out how to, re-navigate life. And I think that happens a lot in our lives, both personally and professionally. And we don't always know how that's going to look. We don't know why those things happen, but it's when we can turn them into something that's positive. That's when we know we're doing what God wants us to do.
It strikes me that the stillborn son could be a metaphor for many things.
Yeah.
What do you observe in business owners out there who have their version of a stillborn son? How would they know they've got one? What would they recognize?
So I call them, I kind of call them blind spots. And I have a blind spot assessment on my website so that people can answer 10 or 12 questions about their business that they may or may not have ever thought about. Because a lot of times people have this passion. They start a business, but then they don't really know how to run a business, or to know when they're running the business and it's not running well, or where they could improve. There's a couple people that say you're in the pickle jar and you can't read the label. And so then we start having losses. It might be financial, it may be employees, it may be clients, and they need to know, how do I stop losing something that I loved and I was waiting for it to flourish and don't know how to start and to find it. And when you don't know what you don't know until somebody says, hey, did you know? And that's where I bring into the table of, let me look at what your business challenges are. You might not even know that they're even there, but I can find them.
So you mentioned there's a thing of loss, right? I'm just thinking about the how would somebody listening to this identify that they're in the pickle jar but they can't read the label? And so you mentioned loss, but what other things may they notice in their business or their life that puts them there?
Sure. I think when you're frustrated, right? I think when you're not sure and you have questions, but you're afraid to ask somebody or to find the answer because you think you can solve the problem yourself. And sometimes you can, but sometimes it's much easier and faster when you hire an expert. I remember the first time I hired a coach, because I had not hired a coach, and how much better my life and my business was. And we forget that along the way of, when we go to school, we have teachers. If we're in a sport, we have coaches. If we look at professional athletes, they have multiple coaches for different aspects of their training, whether it's personal, professional, the mind game. So if nobody says, hey, the way to improve your game in business is to hire an expert, let them come in and see where you need help, because you may not know. right? So it's that being able to think outside the box of what you're doing. Somebody could bring something to you that'll make it easier, might bring some more joy or fun back into the business, fall in love with it again. You've had multiple businesses like I have, and there was a time I remember having a business, I'm like, this isn't serving me. I need to let this go. And it's hard to let that business go because it's a baby. You grew it, right? You started it from nothing, or you purchased it and you put all your love and energy into it, and it didn't grow because it wasn't the right one at the time or the right one for you. And so knowing when to cut your losses and go and let that baby go and either start a new one or figure out what your best next option is.
It's very interesting you say that about it not being either the right time or the right one for you. And, we often can go and do business on an Excel spreadsheet, and you can say somebody else does it like this, therefore I'm just going to do my version of that and copy it. And we don't get the outcome that person's getting. In faith, some people would talk about God's timing and God's plan for you. But how did you find moving on from those businesses? Because I've had one that I had to end, and it felt like I was selling a child. I mean, I'll be honest about it. It's like selling it away. How have you dealt with that personally?
So I've had 7 businesses. 2 of them that I closed because they weren't serving me. Like they just weren't anything. I don't even, when I look back, I'm like, why did I do that? I thought creating a landscape company and separating it from my construction company was a good idea. And it was just more headaches, more work. It was not a good idea. And so I just 2 years later closed it, merged it back into the construction business and moved along from it. So that was fine. I wasn't attached to it enough, didn't have it long enough, realized it was really just sucking life out of me. The ones I've sold, those actually were really actually great because it was like having that kid graduate. Like I got them to 18, they lived, now they're on their own, selling it so somebody else could take it over and do something with it. Felt good, right? I felt like I created something for other people to take and run with.
I how do you know whether it's your thing, right? Whether it's your time, whether this is the business. I remember being at a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, just before 2018, 2019, before all the lockdowns, and the guy stood on stage and put these slides up, and it was names of businesses, and he went through them, and at 164 he put up the business that he was currently stood on stage representing, that had 5,000 people in a conference and has made him hundreds of millions of dollars. And his message was 163 failures of businesses before I found this one. How, we talk about failing fast, but that's terrifying. But how do we kind of identify this is the one or it's not the one for us?
Well, I can tell you with the first company that I sold, which was my HOA management company, and that's been 10 years now. I had gone through, I had been in business with that for about 10 years. I had got back from my father dying, and I remember coming back to very non-empathetic clients, non-empathetic employees. And I remember sitting at my desk and hearing God loudly say, "It's time, sell. No, you're done, sell." I was like, okay. And I didn't always hear God loudly and clearly like I did that day. So I reached out to a connection of mine who connected me with somebody who bought me out by the end of that year. So he died in August. I was closed and sold by December 31st.
Wow.
And I didn't even actually want that company when I started it. I kept getting kind of coaxed into it. Like, hey, you should do this. You should do this. You should do this. I'm like, I don't want to do that job. Nobody likes that person. I don't, no. And then there I was doing it. And I was successful at it. I didn't get fired from properties. I had the same ones I started with. They stayed with me because I even asked one of them, I go, "Why did you hire me when I had no properties under my belt?" She goes, "Because you had integrity. I knew you weren't going to come in here and do something that was going to hurt our company." So that was very interesting to have that, knowing that when you are who you are authentically and do things in integrity, then you'll be successful. And you have to
Oh,
sometimes be
yeah.
still here, whether you're still doing on that right path or not on that right path.
It's funny that the thing our head says we should do is often not the same thing as what it is we're called to do. And often the feedback from other people directing us,
Yeah.
shaping us, moving us is often him placing us where we need to be. I mean, you just
Yeah.
mentioned not hearing God that powerfully previously, and now it sounds like He's more present in your world. How does your faith play out in your business and your journey in business?
It was always by the grace of God. I started a business, my first company, which I still have, the construction company for 24 years, was started over a lunch meeting with an employee that I used to work with, because she said, we need a maintenance person. And I said, we can do that. That's it. Went back, started a business overnight, and lo and behold, there we were. So I think we overcomplicate and overthink things when it comes to going into business. If you feel that passion, then it's right for you. If it feels icky and yucky like other things in your life, then it's not for you.
Mm.
If we don't listen to those intuitions, then we struggle through that business. I've done that too. I didn't listen. I didn't listen because I didn't have my discernment down when I started another business. And I remember feeling like, oh, it'll be okay. It wasn't. It
What
wasn't.
what are your sort of fallback Bible verses that jump to your mind when you're struggling or lost, maybe, or even that guide you as you're taking opportunity? Do you have any that jump to mind?
With God, all things are possible.
Mm. And how's that play? How does that play out on a day-to-day basis for you?
Because I start my day in prayer. I start my day in gratitude and grateful what God has for me for that day. And I just always ask him to lead me where he wants me to be.
Mm. And how do you listen to that? Because it's so many people say, "I don't hear God. I pray, but I don't hear." How
I
does that
don't
play
know.
out?
Yeah, I don't always. Yeah, I don't always hear him either. And so, but you have to still be faithful and consistent.
Mm.
So I still go do what I need to do every day and keep praying about it. Eventually you hear, eventually sometimes we're in denial. I remember when my son died, I was in denial. I knew that he had probably passed, but I was in denial because I thought, how could this happen? Right.
Mm.
And so that process took a little bit of that confidence away from trusting your gut. That takes time to heal. And it's the same thing in business. You're going to make mistakes, and instead of beating yourself up for the mistakes you make, you have to be like, okay, there's a reason that happened, because I do believe everything happens for a reason, good or bad, because it pushes us and directs us in a different place where we're supposed to be, because that's how God gets us where we need to be. We just think, why'd that happen to me? And
Mm.
I was like that for the first day. I was mad at God. Why did he die? And then the next day I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And it took me 20 years to figure out what to do with it. And you can see the book in the back. I wrote a book about my experience and journey through a stillborn, so other people could understand the journey, to be able to help people they knew, or to understand it for themselves, because the weird things that happen going through those types of processes, you can't understand unless you go through it, like with most things in life. So when you can hear from somebody who can share their story, all of it, the good, the bad, and the funny, it just helps you in your life and in other places.
What is there that other people can take from that journey that you went through that was really valuable? Just like one or two things that they could hold on to support them on their path.
So just because you're a Christian and you walk in faith, or you have a faith with God, it doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen to you, right? It's, what are you going to do with those life lessons to help other people?
Mm.
And so even in your business, if you're walking through a situation where, because I think if you don't have experiences where something goes wrong, you can't learn and grow anyway, no matter what it is, anywhere in life, business, personally, and you're still a person, even though you're in a business. So it's knowing, what can I use this for, and being aware of it instead of just being mad about it and just ignoring it. Kind of like with clients that are really just pissing you off because they're just being a pain in your butt. And you have to really stop and you have to be nice. But then what's the lesson learned in that? What's the lesson learned in when somebody doesn't pay you, even though you did a job? And not just wanting to, sue them and go after them. I've learned sometimes you just walk away and you lose the money for your own reputation.
It's interesting, you're referring to something that's I often think is very similar to being lost in the wilderness, right? Is there those moments of chaos where the world's spinning? Often it's an echo chamber. How do we navigate our way out of the wilderness into find the path of belief or the path of hope or the path of opportunity again?
Well, so you have to find where you fit in, like what steps do you have to take for yourself to improve yourself and your life to know you're on the right path and that you have the discernment and that you hear where God wants you to be. I didn't always know where I was supposed to be. And there's times where I have not remembered where I was supposed to be or felt where I was supposed to be. And I was lost, like you said, in the woods. And instead of lighting the fire and throwing up the smoke signals and saying, hey, I need some help with this, tried to navigate it by myself, didn't go so well. When I finally did reach out and ask for help, because people do want to help you, or hired a coach to help me navigate that, you got out of the woods.
So there's always somebody else out there who's got a compass. It's just about finding the person with the compass who can go and be a guide for you.
Exactly. And when I found with most solopreneurs and or small companies that don't have the COO or they don't have somebody else where they can have these type of conversations and just say, hey, this is the situation. What do you think? And just talking around and about a subject helps you process it through your brain, where you either are like, that's what I was thinking, or, oh, I wasn't thinking that, but that's a great idea too. Let's talk more about that. That's one of the fun things I enjoy doing with a business is being like, okay, so tell me, give me your process for this, and then say, well, why do you do it that way? And just get into the thing and make them think about why they're doing something, and then say, well, what if there was a better or easier way? Would you want to know what it is?
Tell me, with all of your experience, what's the number one problem that you run into in businesses that is the one that you have the most frequent conversations about? You could almost predict, as I go into the business, 9 out of 10 times it'll be there. What's the one?
That they didn't start with the end in mind and set up policies, procedures, and protocols from the beginning. They didn't set up a business. They set up what they wanted to do, but they didn't set it up to run and be successful. And so when they all of a sudden were being successful and trying to go back and implement those things and put them in place, they didn't know how, or they didn't do it, and they were just running by the seat of their pants. And they said basically, well, I didn't know that I should have done that. I didn't know I need to have a company handbook. I didn't know I needed to have job descriptions, because you don't know what you don't know if you're just starting a business and had never done one before. Because as an employee, the company makes it look easy, right? Because they brought you in, they told you what you were going to do, you performed, and then you were rewarded. It's not the same when you're running a business.
So, setting up a business, and let's help some business owners, right? Because setting up a business can be a weird and wonderful experience. And many business owners run around and they're thinking, the policies and procedures that many of them even may well know they should have. And if you've qualified in a trade, often the trade qualifications, it says you should have a health and safety policy and a whatever else, all those things. But they're running around busy trying to find the next customer, let's be honest about it, and make their cash flow spin. And all the time and effort seems to go there, and building a policy seems too complicated, too far out. Is it really necessary? Do I have time? The business might not survive next month, so why worry about it? If people were to help themselves in the early stages of their businesses, what would be one or two of the first starting points that they could wrestle their head around, and how can they make it easy for themselves?
I think they should write out what jobs they're going to need to have in their company. So when it's just you, you're all of the jobs, right? You're the accountant, the sales department, the receptionist, everybody. Write those jobs out that you're doing for your company. Write out the job descriptions so that you know what you're doing in each of those divisions. And then as you're meeting people, whether you're in a networking group or you've messaged somebody on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever, or just somebody said, hey, what do you do? Always be thinking if that person could fit that position. We overthink sometimes that we need to hire somebody who has experience. And for some things they do. You don't want to just put somebody in bookkeeping that doesn't know how to do bookkeeping. But what you also want to know is, how is that person going to represent me and my company and my brand? Because you're the brand and the face of the company. Are they going to be an asset or not? And you'll hear people say all the time, hire slow, fire fast. If you hire well, you shouldn't have to think about the firing. If you've taken the time and thought about what you want in an employee, and you were very conscious about that person when you hired them, then the rest will take care of itself for that. They'll be long-term employees because you hired them under all the right reasons of what you were looking for. Because one of my clients hired somebody out of panic and fear, which never do that. Wait until you have the right person, because I said I would not hire this person because I interviewed them with him. I said I would not hire this person. He's like, no, it'll be great. I'm like, it's your company. You do what you want to do. And 5 months later, I want to fire her. So hiring, and that's an expensive process. I don't think that some young companies understand training is expensive. So that's why you want to hire slow, train them well, so that they're going to be there for a long time. So you're not going to have that training turnover expense.
It's in my businesses, and I've only got 3 these days. I used to have quite a few more, but I've only got 3. And I have a strict policy. If anybody sends me a cover letter, a resume, a CV, an email, any of those things looking for a job, I just won't employ them. Period. I'm not interested. Because I actually want somebody to prove to me they can do the job as part of the application process, as opposed to hitting an. I actually want them to be able to play golf as opposed to just knocking the ball at the driving range. And
yes,
so many people are out there pumping websites with their qualifications and sending all this stuff everywhere, but they're not really doing it with purpose. They're just at the driving range hitting golf balls. They're not actually teeing off the first tee. And it's incredible when you make it hard for people to work for you, just the quality of what people come out the other side. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The bit that strikes me from what you just said is people are scared of this bit, right? Hiring your first person. You've been doing all the jobs, number one. So the first thing is, what are the jobs I need to give somebody else to do? And the second thing is, I can only barely afford to pay me. How do I pay this person? How do people navigate that with confidence or faith, or what's the best advice for them?
I think it's both. So I remember when I was hiring my first office manager, and I thought, how am I going to afford this person? Because that's an overhead. It's not like having a worker who's bringing in money. This is something where you're not going to get what your instant ROI. But what I learned was delegating to elevate was super important. If I had to take out a loan to pay for that person until they paid for themselves, right? So when I hired that person, it gave me time to go do more sales, to go do more supervising, to make sure that I was getting everything else done well. Because when you're doing all of those different jobs, you're doing them okay. You might not be doing them as well as they could be done if you just had one person that was doing it, and that was their total job, was to handle those things for you. And then the goal, I believe the goal should be, you want to work on your business, but not necessarily in your business. So that you could go out and do the other things you're doing, whether it's other businesses or you're playing golf while your company is is operating efficiently with the right people in the positions that you hired them for.
I often tell people their first person they want to employ is a Man Friday. I mean, remember that there was the book, and they're probably not going to be qualified at anything to any particular high degree, but they're probably going to be pretty good at solving random problems for you at random times of the day and night. From how do you tweak the website to answering the phone to putting numbers into Excel, you kind of need a jack of all trades, master of none, who's loyal for that first person. Many people struggle to find people. What are the top places that you're going to bump into your first or most ideal employees?
Since COVID, I don't think I have a great answer for that, because I haven't found a place that has had the ideal answer. It used to be we could run an ad and we would get tons of people in. We would do our interviews, no problem. Now people don't want to work. So I find the best way, my favorite way, is through somebody that knows somebody and says, hey, if you let people know you're hiring and what you're hiring for, if you know anybody, send them my way, because they're already solved one problem of the no like trust factor. There's already somebody that knows this person, so there's not a lot. I mean, there could still be surprises, but there should be less surprises because they're kind of giving you a pre-vet, just like getting you a referral for a client. Getting a referral for an employee, I think, is a great way to network with people you already know, like, and trust, to see if they might have somebody.
I think, if you're somebody who's in church on Sunday mornings, having your eyes and ears wide open and having cups of coffee with people in the church is it's a great community that still meets in person, mostly to go tap into. Part of me just wants to make a suggestion to people that you go with an open heart, but maybe a blinkered eye, in as much as you might not be able to or want to employ anybody from your church, but they all know people. And I think it's just listening. So thing number one you mentioned is about who are the jobs you are likely to go and need, and mapping that out for yourself. What's the second thing that somebody could do to help themselves? I mean, we're talking the micro business owner. It's the plumber who's got his van and his tools and he's trying to work out what next.
I would say to hire a coach that you can have as that sounding board. Because when it's just that plumber in the truck and he's starting to grow and he doesn't know how to grow, he doesn't necessarily even know where to go get the answers, because his passion is plumbing. And I can say that only because I am a woman in a construction business. I've been successful because I understood and knew how to run a business. Because a business is a business. You still have your basic stuff. The key things that made us successful in construction was that we answered the phones, we scheduled appointments, we showed up, and we gave them a good service. We had a good rate, and still have customers that we've had for over 10 years. Right? We built that trust by doing what we said we were going to do. And sometimes, especially in trades, they don't do that. So they need somebody to teach them how to do that, because they didn't go to college to learn how to do it and get a business degree like I did, or they hadn't worked in a company and paid attention and had gone through all the different departments and learned, oh, now I understand how these work. I was a quick learner. So when I did have a job and was paid by somebody, I worked in multiple different departments. So I understood everything from being the secretary to collections to inventory to all sorts of different things that gave me a leg up in doing business. So if what you don't know, find somebody who does and ask them. Ask a mentor, ask another company, what do you do? Find a coach that can help walk you through the process.
So I've got a question, but I've also got an observation, is that we'd all be remarkably surprised just how generous people in our industry actually are. And not everybody who's been successful in your industry is going to go and help you. But if you go and ask 5 or 6 people who've got a degree of success in the industry, I'm just starting out, what do I do? Can you help? It's remarkably surprising to me how many people just go, oh, just do it like this or do it like that, or let me know, I'll buy me a coffee and I'll help, whatever, people are far more willing to help than we give them credit for, I think.
And the ones that don't, because they're afraid of it becoming competition, that's foolish. The only competition you have is yourself. Because I used to tell people, there's enough rot in this town to go around. I can't take care of all the maintenance needs that need to be done. We need to have other companies to service.
It's funny, you go back to Proverbs and partnering, or the concept of partnering is something that King Solomon wrote about. And I think we often think it must be a business partner, like 50-50 equity in the business and whatever else. But actually having a string of other coaches or professionals, for me, or if you're a plumber, having two other plumbing firms in case the job gets so big that you need more plumbers on site, or whatever it is. That's what those abundant sort of mentors are thinking about is, well, if we get too much work, we've got somebody we know and trust we can give it to.
Exactly.
I love it. So Joy, you mentioned get a coach, and I started doing this 21 years ago in business coaching. This year, it's been quite a long journey. And when I started off doing this, I could go everywhere and I was the only one, right? And
Yep.
now I go to a networking meeting and it's like I don't know, so there's like 500 expert coaches in the room. And it's all a bit confusing, and they've all been around for 36 seconds or maybe 37 seconds. How does Jeff the plumber or Georgina the plumber, I don't really care, how do they filter out who the right coach or mentor is for them? What would distinguish that person as being useful, competent? I'm not so worried about qualified, but competent versus Kellogg's gave them a certificate 35 seconds ago and now they're adopting the badge.
Well, and what you just said is one of the things. Is the person that I'm talking to, do they have experience under their belt so that they can understand my business? Have the coffee with them and ask them questions and see what answers you get. If that person gives you answers that make sense and you can apply right now, that's somebody worth looking into hiring as a coach. You don't want to hire somebody who can't relate to your business at all and has never had any success in business. If you're looking for a business type coach, you're not going to go hire somebody who's a personal coach because they're not going to understand your business struggles because they may not have ever run a business because just being a coach doesn't make you a business owner. Unless you've grown to the point where you can hire people and then you have to go through all the same processes and pains as you do in a business. Or find that plumber, the other plumber, and maybe they're not even in your area. Like call a plumber in a different state and just say, hey, I need a mentor. I was wondering if you could just answer some questions for me. And since we're not in the same state, it wouldn't feel like, we're competing or I'm trying to steal your business. I just needed to ask another plumber, have you ever run into this problem?
Do you think we could come up with 3 questions right here between the pair of us? 3 questions that somebody could ask a coach that would kind of give them the filter as maybe I should consider this person further or maybe I shouldn't. What would be the 3 questions that would, or what would be one question that you kind of wish somebody would ask you, Joy, but you're like, oof, that's a toughie.
I would ask, well, what makes you qualified to be my coach? How are you going to be able to help me? What's my experience? I think that's a big one because I can sit there and tell you my experience of what I did from being when I was an employee and in my businesses that would show you that I have authority to be able to help you. The second question I would ask them is, well, what do you think you can do for me? How do you think you could really help me? And the third thing would be is I would actually want them to tell me what their problems are to see if I can help them. Because just asking me generically, how are you going to help me? Well, it depends. Where do you think you need help? And sometimes they don't even know. And what I find is when we're just having the conversation and I start asking questions on top of the questions they're asking me, it makes them be like, oh, well, what about this then? And what about that? their brain starts processing all the problems they've been keeping up in their head, they start to come out. And then they realize, oh, wow, I do need help more than I thought.
Mm. I find that if there's coaches out there who are going to promise you get rich fast and
Right.
results that are mind-blowingly wonderful, your wildest dreams in months or even a year and a half, and that there's a miracle cure, and that there's a set process that we follow that always works. I think for me, those are things to run a mile from.
Yes.
In my opinion, the coach people deserve is somebody who's a tailor, and they don't just have a suit off the peg that they're going to force you to wear because that's what they do with everybody. They actually are more of the tailor. Who are you? Where are you going to? So on and so forth. Let me come up with a solution for you that's unique for you. That's probably the coach most people want.
Yep. Yeah, because it's about them. And as coaches, we need to remember that it's about them and not about us, and that you sometimes have to tread carefully to be able to get them where they need to go without insulting them about how they got where they are. Because they don't want to say, I'm in business and I can't do it myself. So does that make me weak? Does it make me a failure? Does that not make me a good business person? The answer is, well, no, it just means you didn't have the tools. So I'm going to give you the tools.
That's it. If you've only got a hammer, don't expect to get results from a screwdriver because you haven't got one.
Correct. And so what do you do? So that's a good example. So what would you do then, right? So if I'm a plumber and I only have a hammer, but I need to have a wrench, I need to know I need to go somewhere to find out how to get the wrench.
So I want to move on a little bit. Many Christian business owners and entrepreneurs wrestle with money. We're often taught that money is at the root of all evil. Greed is a sin. There's the lust for money. There's so much. And yet, if you actually spend any time reading the Bible, you'll learn that King Solomon earned about $1.9 billion a year repeatedly. And therefore, God's not going to put that in there unless there's not an opportunity for us to go there. But even if somebody's not of faith, business owners often struggle with money in their head. How can they help themselves navigate their money thoughts to actually go and take the business that they started with a dream, right, with an idea of where it could go to, and actually turn it into that dream? How can they help themselves?
Well, one, don't be afraid of success. Sometimes business owners are afraid of success because they don't know what it looks like. They don't know how to know when they're successful, and success is different for everybody. And as long as you're not only doing it for the greed of money or the love of money, because you can't put anything up in front of your love for God, then you're fine. And God does give us an abundance ability. So trust and stay in your faith. And your business growth, when it happens, be grateful for it. If you show appreciation, because if you remember in the Bible, we had 10 people that he cured, and only one said thank you. So remember to be grateful for what God has given you.
I love it. So we're wandering around here, and I'm pretty sure there's a whole bunch of business owners who want to give it a go to do what you do for themselves. Because if I'm to be honest with you, most of us entrepreneurs are stubborn rascals, and we at least want to try it before we go and seek the help of a professional. Now, I'm a big fan of seeking the help of a professional. If anybody needs a professional to help them build systems, processes, business structure, go spend time with Joy. But 1 in 10 or 1 in 100, Joy, they are going to be able to figure it out for themselves. What's this building, this structure, this chief operating officer stuff? How can somebody start having a go at it for themselves?
I mean, just Google it. Google how to set up a business. Go take a class somewhere. There's lots of different ways. Ask somebody. But it's more than just knowing. It's also not just knowing how to put these structures in place. It's also knowing how to implement them and actually use them. So I can give you a driving instruction book that tells you how to drive a car. Some people could go out there and get in the car and drive it, but most people probably can't and would do better if they had an instructor sitting with them and guiding them through the process so that what they've learned and now they're applying all come together.
Mm. Mm. I fully get it. It's just one of the biggest blocks for people using professionals is they believe they can do it themselves. You know, if you go on YouTube, some of the number one search things in the home improvement is how to plumb your own house, how to wire your extension, and people are hunting those things for a reason. And I think that I'd actually encourage people to go give it a go. And it's counterintuitive. Go give it a go, because when you've given it a go, you'll realize how much value the professional actually is to you. You know, when you've electrocuted yourself 5 times because you didn't bring in the electrician, you'll really, really appreciate the electrician. And so I would encourage people to give it a go because I think it's valuable.
Agree.
There's a flow and a process to business, Joy. And at the start of it, you mentioned getting out there more and being seen more. And in all honesty, businesses without marketing aren't a business. They're just a great idea.
They're a habit.
It's a habit. It's a thing. Yes,
Hobby.
A hobby. Yeah, well, you turn up in the office and pretend to do something every day. How do business owners find out what structures to build around marketing for themselves? And I'm well aware you're on that journey for yourself right now as well. So, just maybe if you could share some of your own personal experience about where you're going to, because customer acquisition is probably the hardest thing we're ever going to have to do. What would be a good place to start?
So I'm going to have to break that bubble a little bit, because 2 of my most successful businesses, I didn't spend only about $1,000 a year on marketing, and it really wasn't even for marketing. I just believed in this company that I could put my business information on because I agreed with what they did, but it never generated me any business. My biggest success was being my integrity. It became word of mouth referral. My 2 successful businesses were all based on word of mouth referrals. Still getting referrals. I don't advertise for my construction company. People come to me because their neighbors use me, their friends use me, their HOA management company used me. And so they're like, you need to call them, you need to call them. So I don't have the smartest answer, and why I've hired David to help me with that, because I had not had to use regular traditional marketing in growing my businesses.
But the referral thing's very interesting. I often talk about the concept of building a godly product or a godly service. And an abundance of referrals is usually a reflection of having built a godly product or a godly service. So what's so good about what your construction firm's doing, for instance, that the phone rings out of the blue and business just keeps arriving? What is it that makes that firm maybe different in the same industry to many other firms in the same industry out there?
Ever since the conception 24 years ago, when I set it up the way I worked in businesses. And so answering the phone, scheduling appointments, and showing up for those appointments on time were so impressive to clients, because so many people would be calling us saying, well, I called this guy 3 times and he never called me back, or he made an appointment and he didn't show up. So those people don't stay in business, because people will spread the bad part about your business around faster than they will the good stuff about your business. That's where your integrity of who you are comes into play. Of don't just tell people stuff and not follow up and do stuff. Don't come into their homes or into their world and give them a crappy product or a crappy service. because you won't be in business long, and you might make some money right now, but that won't last.
Mm.
And like I said, we don't advertise. So we're still in business 24 years later. We survived through COVID because of our reputation.
Mm. It's interesting that the do the job fast, do it cheap, do it at the bare minimum quality, don't stick to some of those values. That almost falls back to that love of money. Get the cash in quick,
Yeah.
run away. How do you, I mean, you've got a construction firm, so you've got a whole bunch of people, and this actually goes back to being chief operating officer. How do you get that culture built for a whole bunch of people on a site, some of whom probably are highly qualified, others have probably only left high school with no more qualifications? How do you get that culture right in your business? Because you said, your employees represent you as a human being.
Yep.
How do you square that circle?
So it's the same way as what the hiring process, when we're interviewing and going through that, I try to figure out what type of person is this? Can I send them into somebody's home and not worry about them stealing from them or getting high on the job? Because this is the type of industry where you never know what kind of thing you're going to get. So we hired people that were going to reflect the business the same. And even when it comes to subcontractors, if our subcontractors couldn't show up, do a good job, and we didn't get complaints, then they stay. We still have some of those same subcontractors because they're a reflection of us.
Okay. It's very, I think it's one of those biggest, least spoken about things is people often just get the, they're an electrician, so we'll send them to the site to get it done, as opposed to actually thinking about what the ripple effect is of that afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
I've only got a few questions remaining, but I've got a curiosity that's been burning a hole in my head, and I want to come back to your stillborn son.
Sure.
Many of us have quite traumatic moments in business, and in reality, we're all trying to do the one in 100,000 thing, right? Most people get a job, most people get a package, most people, if something horrible happens, have vacation, unpaid leave, a sympathetic firm of some sort. We get a safety net, I suppose. As entrepreneurs, there's no safety net. Something horrific happens, and we have to be back at work 3 days later, whether we like it or not, or we lose a lot more. How did you personally ride that wave to keep everything afloat? I mean, for good or bad?
Sure. So when I had started, so he came about a year after I started my construction company, but I was actually running it with subcontractors because I was still working a full-time job. So I ended up going back to work part-time, and I actually sat down. This is something everybody should do. I sat down and wrote out how much money I made where I was working, how much my daycare was costing me for my daughter to go to daycare, and how much was it going to cost me in gas and clothes and things like that for me to have this job. And when I got done at the end of the day, I was clearing $700 a month. And I thought to myself, well, that's a part-time job. Why am I working full-time, not being a mom and doing all this stuff for what? Not that I didn't enjoy my job and doing the maintenance on the side, but I thought, well, what if I stayed home and opened a daycare and grew the maintenance company? What would happen? And so that's what I did. I did take 2 weeks off. I was home for 2 weeks after he passed and went through that process, and then realized I had to go back out into society, which that kind of sucked. So I quit my job and I had a daycare, which I made $1,100 a month watching other people's kids while I was raising my kid and while I was growing my construction company. And I wish I had the picture. I remember one time sitting in my rocking chair, I had a baby in my lap, I had a headset on, I had the bottle over here, and I had a notepad answering a phone call. I was just juggling all the balls. But it only took me about a year to get the company to the level where I could hire somebody. So I had the daycare for about 2 years because it just gave me that time to, grow the business enough so I could start running it full time. And shortly after that, I started another company. I think I had 2 companies for probably the last 23 years.
Mm. It's
You
like
kind of just
there's,
have to do it.
you just have to,
You have curl up in a ball and die, or put your feet on the ground every day. Be grateful that you can get up and go and do it. It doesn't mean you're disrespecting the loss or the trauma that you went through. For me, it was, I had to feel my way through it, I said. It's a loss, just like you're going to have lots of losses in your life, whether they're losses of finance in your business, loss of family members, loss of a home. There's a lot of losses that we're going to experience. How do you choose to show up, and how do you choose to navigate through those? And I know I couldn't have done it without God, because otherwise I would have been depressed, on drugs, or something else, because it's that depressing to go through losing and delivering a child. But I trusted that this happened for a reason and that I had to do something positive with it. That stayed in my mind. It just took me 20 years to figure out what it was. It was a little slow there.
um, how did you keep that faith with God throughout that? Because it's very easy to have a natural, probably, to have a. I mean, I died in 1998. So I had a why me for quite a while. What did I do to
Yeah.
deserve this? How did you? And I really didn't hold my faith with God at all. By the way, he was some dude who could go over there miles away. I'm not interested in him. How did you keep yours, or how did you manage it, or how have you? What advice do you have for people who are struggling with that?
Yeah. So I knew I couldn't do it alone. Like, I knew that my family was good to a point. My friends were great about letting me talk about him as if he was real, because some people would get really like, oh, she's talking about that dead baby. And I'm like, but he wasn't just a dead baby to me, right? He was potential and future and all the things that he could have been and he didn't get to be. And that was how I was able to navigate it without, I didn't take any antidepressants. I didn't go through any counseling. I didn't do anything, because people gave me space. And I remember knowing that, like I said, I was mad the first day. The second day, I was like, okay, God, why is this happening to me? What am I supposed to do with it? So it gave me a purpose. And I think we need to understand we all do have a purpose that God has put us here for. And so for me, it was writing that so that other people had an understanding of what that journey is like, going from finding out you're pregnant to losing a child and what happens after. So that either, again, for somebody who's lost and needs to share that story from somebody else, or be able to say, when they find out about somebody, to not be like, oh, I don't know if I should talk about it, I don't know what I should do, is like, let's bring some normalcy around this, that it's okay to talk to somebody and say to them, I'm sorry, this really sucks that this happened to you, and not be like, oh, you can have another one, it probably happened for a reason, because that's not what any of us want to hear when it happens. I want to hear it sucked and I'm sorry, and get mad with me, right? And let me talk about it. Because there was some, I'm going to bring out the funny excerpt out of here, because people would probably think this is a little bit, oh, whatever they can think. I don't care. He was cremated. And so we had him on our TV stand at the time. And my daughter at the time my oldest was 4. And her goldfish died. So what do you do with goldfish when they die? Flush them down the toilet, right? So we're in the bathroom flushing the goldfish down the toilet. And she looks up at me, is like, is that what you did with my brother? I had all I could do to not be my pits. I was like, oh, no. And then I had to go through and explain the whole thing, right? So I had called one of my friends who was gracious about letting me share with her. And I said, you're not going to believe what Kira just said to me. And we laughed, because it's funny. It's a little weird, but it's funny. And so fast forward, she had a pregnancy that didn't develop and had to go through a loss. And she remembered I cremated. So she cremated her baby. And so she called me one day and said, you're the only one that's going to laugh with me and not think I'm crazy or sick. So her little boy at the time was about 4 or 5, and he was running around the neighborhood saying they had a burnt baby on the shelf. So we could laugh, right? Because that's a child's perspective. We forget children are still people, just a little tiny body. They don't miss anything. So always be aware of what you're saying around your children. Make sure you are ready for some of these crazy things that come at you. And it's okay to laugh. Even in tragedy, sometimes we have to still laugh to remember we're human, and God had a sense of humor. I always say, look at the giraffe's long neck. I still think it's so funny that he's got this big long neck. So it's okay to laugh, because laughter is a good source of medicine.
I love it. I love it. So I've got 3 questions for you before we wrap this up. The one is this: um, you've had that coffee with Jesus that we started off the interview with, and you get to ask him, Jesus, you God and the Holy Spirit, you've been plotting about me. What next? Where am I going to? So where's Joy going to?
Well, see, Joy's going to be creating a mastermind that we invite people to an experience that is both educational and also fun. And it's probably going to be in a really cool place.
Ooh, I like it. Invite me. I'll be there.
Okay. It'll probably be in June of next year, so you'll be invited.
Fantastic. Where's the cool place? Have I been there? Do we know it?
Probably. It begins with an F.
Oh, okay, cool. It's like 12 hours north of me then. Okay, got it. Got it. Cool. So the second from last question is, what's the question that you'd like me to ask the next guest?
I want you to ask them what made them get into business.
Cool. And that's Mr. David Heiner, by the way. I'll let you know how that goes. What made them get into business? And if somebody's stuck inside the pickle jar, they know they're in there. They know there's a label on the outside. They really should be able to read. They're scared, right? They're like bringing in a professional. It's my business. Like, what if, so on and so forth. What's the easiest way for them to step forwards to get in touch with you, maybe have a coffee with you and see how they can move their world forwards?
Sure. They can either reach out to me on the social media platforms on Facebook or LinkedIn, or they can just email me at joy@yourjoyfulsolutions, or there's a thing on my website that they can schedule that call. It's yourjoyfulsolutions.com. There's a button on there that says, want to have a talk? Let's go.
Excellent. And last bit, what do you want them to bring to the meeting?
Lots of questions.
Cool.
Bring lots of questions.
I love it. Joy Harris, thank you so much for your time this evening, or this afternoon, whatever time of day or night it is. I'm a bit lost. Thank you so much.
5 o'clock somewhere.
5 o'clock somewhere. That's it. Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing some of the most exposing moments in your life. But also thank you for providing so much value to the world. And I just look forward to following God's journey for you and with you over the next decade. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Thank you.